three sections of questions to ask Alex. The first is introductory questions about Alex. The second is student advice. And the third is kind of general life advice. So without further ado, Alex, thank you so much for joining us. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Kat. First of all, hello, everyone. I'd like to apologize for not having my camera on. I unfortunately tweaked my back really badly this afternoon, and I'm laying flat on the floor, and that is not a view I want recorded. So I am here. I am looking at your smiling faces. Nice to meet you all. So my name is Alexandra, and I guess I'll start with just my academic journey, who I am and how I got here. So I went to Corpus Christi from St. Thomas More Collegiate High School straight through. So I went to Corpus in 2012, and I did my Associate of Arts in Liberal Arts within the 2-year program at Corpus Christi. When I finished that program, Corpus Christi and St. Mark's were teaming together for the Bachelor of Arts in Theology and Culture program, and they were gearing it towards future teachers. And that is exactly what I wanted to do. So I had intended to go from Corpus directly to UBC, but the school I loved, with the people I loved, was offering a program to do the thing I loved. So I ended up waiting an extra year until the beginning of the program. So I was one of 4 graduates in the very first BA cohort. So that was amazing. And during that 1-year gap before it started, I took extra courses at Corpus, and I also took some distance education through UBC, and just kind of worked my way through different disciplines just to see what I liked because I had the time. And that kind of ended with me graduating from St. Mark's in 2017. And from there, I transferred directly to UBC to do the Bachelor of Education in secondary school. And I trained to be an English and a history teacher in their 11-month program. Graduated from that in 2018 and received a job offer from Notre Dame Regional Secondary High School, which is a private Catholic high school in East Vancouver. Began there in September. So I've now been there for 2 years. And while I was there, I began a Master of Arts for teachers in English. And this is a program offered every 2 years from SFU. And so it's a Master of Arts for teachers in English. And we were a small cohort of 8 people, all training to teach, all training to be better adept to teach English. And the concentration of the master's was in Indigenous literatures. So I spent 2 years training in Indigenous literatures and studies, and I graduated 3 weeks ago with my Master of Arts. And that's kind of who I am academically. So that answers your question.
That's wonderful, and congratulations.
Thank you, Angela.
A big congratulations to all of us. I know that you've worked very hard, and good things come to those who work hard. So congratulations, Alex.
Oh, thank you very much.
So how did you hear about Corpus Christi, and what kind of drew you to Corpus Christi and St. Mark's?
As I said, I went to St. Thomas More Collegiate High School, which is in Burnaby, and it's a private Catholic school. And I believe somebody from Corpus Christi College came and spoke to us while I was in my last 2 years there. And I was really interested in a UBC education, but with a Catholic focus that was small and community filled. And that's really what drew me to Corpus. It was on UBC campus. I had full access to amenities. I was part of the culture, the life there, but I had this beautiful community that was mine, I knew everyone's name. They knew mine. There was nobody more than 30 in a class. And I loved having that personal connection with my peers, with my profs. And it was just it was tailored to the kind of educational experience that I wanted. So that's what drew me to Corpus.
That's wonderful. Well, great answer. So in your opinion, what role does Corpus and St. Mark's play in your day-to-day life?
My day-to-day life. My education's been slightly unique in terms of I started small, I went through a small college, did all my training there, and then moved to a bigger university. So I would say Corpus gave me such a strong sense of professional and academic ethics. It taught me how to be a student. It taught me how to engage in the academic community in a respectful, professional way. And when I went off to UBC and then SFU, I was able to really, really see just how much that extra attention that Corpus places on their students. I was able to see how that extra attention really, really guides you. And to this day, I honestly believe go small, have know everybody, know what kind of learner you are, because that's a huge part of first and second year, just figuring out what kind of learner you are. And from there, you're able to really take those skills and run with them. So I very, very much believe that it set a very solid foundation for me. And when I went off and I started teaching, I had that foundation. I was able to draw on it. I'm able to teach the way I was taught. And that's been really powerful for me.
I'm glad that you brought up the size of Corpus, because I think that I could argue that we are tiny but mighty, in the sense that it's such a wonderful place, and you get a completely unique post-secondary experience, which is a benefit in my opinion and differentiates us from other higher learning institutions. So thank you for touching on that point. So you completed your AA, and then you completed your BA from St. Mark's, and then you transferred to UBC to complete your Bachelors of Education.
Yes.
Girl, you have degrees. I respect it.
Thank you.
So could you speak a little bit about your transfer experience from St. Mark's to UBC and how Corpus, prepared you for that? Or St. Mark's, I should say.
Yeah, that was definitely more St. Mark's, just because you're in the final years, so you're actually thinking about it at that point. Honestly, the transfer experience, it's kind of like what you go through when you first apply to get into university after high school or later in life. But when you apply to an institution, it's essentially always the same process with just slightly different variables. So the really cool thing about going from St. Mark's to UBC in the BEd is because the BA at St. Mark's was new and exciting and small, there was a lot of connection with the BEd department in terms of what the expectations were, what we could do for entrance and stuff like that. So I was able to meet with the people in the BEd department a couple times in my final year at St. Mark's to ask them, what do you need from me? And then I kind of just sold the St. Mark's program. People love things that are new. People love things that are unique. And even though I still think this program is new, but it's not as new as it was, but it is still just as unique. And so if you can go into a meeting and sell that, if you can go in and say, I have something nobody else has, and that is cool, honestly, you're going to go really far. So my biggest advice would be book a meeting with the BEd department in September, October of your final year. Get to know them, make a contact with them. Even if you have all the information, ask them some good questions. And then you have a contact. It's a very powerful thing. And then the road in is pretty well paved for you. And then it's just completing references and a small essay.
That's fantastic advice. So all you future teachers, take notes, I have heard that UBC Advising is starting to offer online advising sessions. So maybe during your quarantine, if you have some spare time, it might not be a bad idea to, book an appointment, even just half an hour, ask a couple questions, and more importantly, even make that connection, just like Alex said. So that's a wonderful piece of advice. So I have a question for you about when you started teaching. So once you finished your education and you started teaching, what kinds of things surprised you?
The biggest surprise to me was how little time you spend in the classroom.
Oh,
Honestly, I began my journey with wanting to be an English teacher because I love literature. I love every part of it, and helping somebody discover those skills, literacy skills, it's just so powerful because it really does open the world to them. So that was my initial thrust into becoming a teacher. And then I became a teacher and I realized, wait a second, they don't just need to know Hamlet. They need to know how to be people. They need to be seen as people. They need to have conversations about what they're going through. Otherwise, they're not going to learn anything. So my biggest surprise was just, it was a lesson in compassion and humility for me when I began teaching, because it made me realize you can love Shakespeare, you can love Thomas King, and that's wonderful, and that passion and that engagement will teach them something. You can be the best teacher in the world, but if you're not talking to them as individuals, spending that time getting to know them, helping them get in touch with the counseling services they may need, helping them organize themselves, if you're not doing all of that stuff, then they don't care about Shakespeare. They don't care about literacy. So, as I said, my biggest surprise starting to teach was just realizing that teaching is one of the smallest parts of the job.
wow. That was a very heartfult answer. You know,
Yes, I thought about that a lot, actually.
wow.
It's a
You
weird
remind
one.
me of
It's a weird
my
moment.
grade 12 English teacher in high school, and I don't think I will ever forget him. Definitely someone who gave me a lot of life advice, career advice, and I can tell that you're very passionate about what you do, and that I'm sure that comes through in your teaching. So
Thank
that's
you.
wonderful.
I hope so.
I'm sure. So is there anything that you would have done differently throughout your university career that you think may have changed your course of your career at all?
If honestly, if the St. Mark's BA program hadn't began when it did, if it hadn't gone through, I may not be where I am today.
Wow.
I may have gone a different route. I may have become a writer, an editor, I don't know. I don't know. A professional traveler. But
That's the
honestly,
dream.
yeah, right. Get paid. But honestly, teaching is such the right fit for me. But if I hadn't had the right vicinity in which to learn those skills, I'm not sure I would have had such a smooth transition into my career. So that is definitely a learning. If there's something I could do differently, I don't think I'd do anything differently because I learned a lot along the way. But I
Mhm.
will just reiterate the importance of getting involved. If you can get a job at Corpus like that, I had one while I was there. Fantastic. It's just such a great way to be involved in the community. Um, Being involved in student council, which I was part of that in the BEd at UBC as well. Just all these opportunities where you can meet like-minded individuals and learn skills that you just can't experience in a classroom.
Mhm.
That would be my biggest thing, and I would probably even do more of it going back. So involvement is huge.
That's a really great segue into my next question, because I was going to ask you, what kind of extracurricular activities would you recommend for students to not only find a sense of community, but to add something to their resume and also potentially work towards a career?
hmm I just start thinking about what are you passionate about? What do you like? And then start looking for opportunities.
Mhm.
So, for instance, if you like public speaking or you want to get better at it, take a look at the UBC debate team, or
Mhm.
they have a slam poetry club. I went to a few meetings of both, and I met some great people. It challenged me because I was scared to death. And then when I became a teacher, they were looking for somebody to lead the debate team. And it's like, oh, I actually know what that looks like because I did a couple of those. So you never know where these things are going to take you. Again, at Corpus, I was sort of interested in photography, but didn't want to do much with it. So a few of my friends and I got together and we just started taking pictures around the school, posting them around. And now I'm the advisor of the yearbook club. So it's at the school I teach at. So it's honestly just, it's so crazy how relatable and relevant the skills you can experience in extracurriculars are for your professional life as well. So just start with a passion and then just get involved. It will help you in some regard.
That's a really good way to put it. Great piece of advice. So I will be asking Alex about 2 to 3 more questions. So if viewers wanted to start firing their questions in the chat or just saying, I have a question, I will be calling on you shortly. So start getting the wheels turning and think about something that you would like to ask Alex. You know, she's very wise, she's done the experience, and, you know, she has succeeded, you know, beyond measures. So
I'm not sure I'd say wise, but thank you, Kat. It's very kind.
I would say so. Very knowledgeable. Maybe that's a better way to put it. But so my next question is, I know that you love to read. What book would you recommend kind of anyone to read over the summer, or what is your favorite book?
My absolute favorite book is The Winter Sea by Susanna Kearsley. It's a historical fiction novel that has a section in it that spans modern times and follows a character in modern day. And then it flips back to the 18th century in Scotland during the Jacobean Revolution. So there's some beautiful connections between history and modernity. And it's just so fabulously written because Susanna Kearsley was a curator. So she actually knows what she's talking about. And it's just such a fun, beautiful read. So that is number one. And then if you're looking for something a little different, The Marrow Thieves is a Canadian Indigenous novel that was geared towards youth, but I find it so deep and just brimming with authenticity. So that one is The Marrow Thieves, and that is just a stunning post-apocalyptic dystopian novel about a group of Indigenous people and their role in the world after the end of the world. So it's really, really beautiful.
Got it. Okay, really good to know. What did you say the author was of The Marrow Thieves?
I think her name is Cherie Dimaline. Dimaline, I believe. Okay. I actually saw her speak a couple years ago at the Writers' Fest in Vancouver, and she's just an outstanding speaker. So honestly, this book, The Marrow Thieves, I wouldn't be surprised if they turn it into a movie in the coming years. So honestly, take a look. Really beautiful.
So everyone read the book first, because we all know read the book first is better than watching the movie first. Great. So my last question for you, Alex, before I open it up to the rest of the audience, is what career and life advice do you have for the current students right now, you know, during this pandemic? How do you stay positive? How do you continue to work towards your goals? Just kind of any sort of lasting piece of advice that you have for them.
Honestly, I would just reduce it to get involved, which are really puny, inconsequential words. But when you think back to everything I've said, it all relates to getting involved.
Definitely.
Meet with somebody at the BEd department. Reach out and do coffee chats like this. Share your enthusiasm and passion with others by getting involved in clubs and extracurriculars. The more you're involved, the more opportunities you have to draw on, which helps you so much as a professional, but also just as a human being. And honestly, during this pandemic, people are looking for connection. So it's the best time in the world to reach out. And those connections that you make, whether they're professional or just social, are really going to carry you in your life.
That's great. Wow, all, great pieces of advice. I've taken lots of notes, guys, as you can see, and it's great that this is recorded. So now I will be opening the questions up to the floor. If anyone has a question that they would like to ask, please type in the chat, I have a question, or raise your hand. And you can do that by clicking at the bottom right under reactions. So open up the floor to anyone who may have a question for Alex. Okay, we'll start with Angela. Angela, what is your question?
Okay, hello. First of all, thanks again, Alexandra, for coming and giving this talk. I think one of the things that I was just thinking about as you were talking was, like, for me, I know this is one of my anxieties of becoming a teacher, because I want to get into high school, and I consider myself a very soft person, like, not in my tone, I speak very loud, but like as a character. And I'm just wondering, like, one of the things I'm wondering is, of course, in high school, sometimes you have students that sometimes don't want to cooperate, or they're kind of a bit more hard to make a connection with. And I'm just wondering, maybe, like, what kind of advice, or I don't know, like, any tips you can give for, like, how to kind of get closer to them and how to help them be engaged with their class and their classmates.
That is such a great question. I honestly, Angela, I went through the same thing. I became a teacher very young, obviously, like right out of university. I went all the way through. So, and I started teaching grade 12. So my anxiety was, I'm only a few years older than them. Why would they listen to me? And when you're experiencing these anxieties, the best antidote to them is confidence, even if you have to fake it. Honestly, if you fake being confident, they will think you're confident and they will respect you for it. And that sometimes can come across just by, as you said, using like a loud voice and smiling and being there for them. And in terms of connecting with them, my little secret is treat everyone like an adult. Don't talk down to a student, no matter if they're in grade 8 or grade 12, because they will know, they will pick up on that. And they won't respect you, but they also won't trust you. And therefore, they probably won't learn anything from you. So when you're chatting with a student, you ask them questions about their daily life that you would have wanted to be asked, or that you want to be asked right now. And just talk to them as peers. And it can be difficult because a lot of them are very immature, but if you give them the benefit of the doubt, I promise more often than not, they will surprise you and go above and beyond. And Angela, that's just going to come through practice. So your practicum, when you go through your BEd, your practicum is invaluable for that. Talk to everyone, make mistakes, put yourself out there, challenge yourself in that regard, and that will so help you, give you the confidence that you need when you are alone in that room. And if you're too far away from the practicum and that anxiety is with you and you just want to get started, start volunteering. I would love a student helper in my room. Every teacher would love a student helper in their room. And it gives you a time to observe and make notes and really methodically reflect on what kind of teacher you want to be. And that will give you the confidence to connect with them. So just practice, just get in the room.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
I hope that answers your question.
Oh, it's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, good.
That was a fantastic question, Angela. Thank you. And a very in-depth answer. I've taken lots of notes, guys. I have. So next we will hear from John. John, what is your question?
Hi, I'm the alumni here to like class 2019. Why ND? Like, why high school? Like over like elementary or something?
Okay, the canned answer I have to that is because I can't use scissors properly and can't cut in a straight line, which is kind of a job requirement in elementary school. But the serious answer is I wanted to teach students. I wanted to help students become human beings, become intelligent and autonomous, and I want them to learn how to self-advocate, and I want to have intellectual conversations with them, kind of like this. And I felt that that best fit for me spanned above the age of 12. And also I can't count, and so I would be a horrible math teacher. Does that answer your question?
Oh, that's great. Good question.
Yeah, okay.
I like it. That was a humorous answer. I enjoyed that.
Honestly, that was part of my decision making, though. It was I could not teach math or science, so.
Aw. So next we will hear from Jarwin. Jarwin, what is your question?
Hello, I'm happy I put my other name because there's two Johns in this room. Hi, Alex. Thank you for your time.
Hi.
So two questions are sort of related. One is, what is summer like as a teacher? Because I hear different things from different people saying like, oh, summer is great because you're not working. But then also I hear like, oh, summer you're preparing for the next school year, and so you are basically working. So I guess like, what is summer really like for like a young teacher, like fresh into the water? And I've also heard, and this is the second question, it kind of ties into that, is I've heard like there is this, it's like 3 to 5 years, like first 3 to 5 years of teaching is where most teachers will burn out. And so how would you like mitigate burnout, or how do you take care of yourself in a new environment such as like a high school?
Yeah, those are such amazing questions, Jarwin. Thank you. Okay, summer goes by so freaking fast. Honestly. So as a teacher, you are paid 10 months of the year. Your salary is based on 10 months of the year, not 12. So you have to know in July and August that you're not seeing a paycheck as an educator. You can go into summer school, obviously, and teach that, but typically those are more experienced teachers who've been doing it for years, and they have seniority in getting those roles. So for me, last summer I had a part-time job at a comedy club, and I worked there just for a little extra, pocket money. And in terms of planning, I would highly recommend you don't. You will get different opinions of this based on just how you yourself operate. But by the end of the year, teachers are burnt out. Even the best teachers, well, especially the best teachers, but everyone's burnt out, because teaching is very draining. You will find it's incredibly draining. And when July comes around, you need that time to just self-care. So if you spend it planning, you won't be fresh in September. It goes by so fast. I recommend planning something called a scope and sequence. Basically, it's at a glance, what do you want your year to look like? For instance, I want to teach 5 units based on the curriculum, and I'm going to put these 5 units into these themes. Then I would just say, plan your first 2 weeks of school, and that is it. So know where you're starting and know what you want to finish with. As in, I want my students to be able to reflect on themselves as individuals. If that's my end goal, great. What are my 5 themes for the year? And then what are my first 2 weeks of class look like? And the reason for this is because you will not know the strengths and the challenges that you will have in that room until you're in that room. You could spend your entire summer planning the perfect year class, and then you get in the room and realize you have 5 people on the autistic spectrum. You have 5 people that are not fluent in English. You have 5 people who are bumped up a grade and don't have that foundational skill. So if you spend all your time planning and making the perfect lesson plan for the whole year, you will have to redo it. And I promise you will have to redo it. So don't overthink it. Know what you want the year to look like in terms of, I want to teach narrative, I want to teach character development, I want to teach short stories. And then just sit back and say, okay, my first 2 weeks, let's get to know each other as people. Let's do some formative skills, as in, can they write? Do they know how to form a sentence, etc.? And then you can start planning. And if you do it that way, you will have time and you won't burn out, because if you structure it in a smart way, you will be fine. Yeah. And your second question was burnout, right? I kind of touched on that, but burnout, to reduce it, honestly, with that 3 to 5 years, that's because a lot of teachers jump in and they spend every night planning, all day teaching, all weekend marking, and that is not a maintainable case. So it can be done in a day's work. You just have to say, that's all I can do, because I'm human too. And it's hard to admit to yourself, really, really difficult. And the first year you will be tired, but honestly, you have to cut it off somewhere. So just figure out what's most important to you and go with that. The rest will just happen.
Thank you so much.
Come.
That's a great answer. So Alex, I know that you're also quite busy, but do not forget to relax. I mean, you deserve it.
Thank you.
Good. So next we will hear from Amy. Amy, thank you for asking a question. Go ahead.
Mine is pretty similar. I was just wondering where, judging that you are an empathetic individual who, wants to help your students and help them grow as individuals, I guess kind of like, where are some tips on how to draw that boundary for yourself to maintain a professional relationship with your students, but also to give them the care they need?
Great question.
That's fantastic. That's a hard question because it's very subjective. Every person will have their own line. An amazing course you're going to take at UBC, and I'm sure the SFU program has it as well, but it's an ethical dilemma course. And they will give you ethical dilemmas, and you will have to come up with ethical dilemmas. And this is really where you touch on that. What are the boundaries? How do you maintain professionalism while still having fun and getting to know your students as individuals? So that ethical dilemma course is really going to help you with that. Personally, honestly, it's little things you do. You always push the onus on them. How are you? What are you up to? Things like that. If you told me about your new bike last week, how's it running? Stuff like that. If you remember little details about them and kind of just push it back to them, you'll be able to maintain that slight gap. You want to tell stories, you want to show who you are too, but you're there for them. And that is a good way of creating some distance, talking about what you do in your own time. Come up with a few good ones and then just leave it there, sort of thing. So be very caring and show them that you're a person too, but just maintain some professional distance, because when you go home, you have your own world as well. And if you take home their concerns, their struggles every day, you will come back to that whole idea of burnout. And it's easier said than done, and it's something I struggle with a lot, because some of it is really heartbreaking, the stuff that students will share with you. But at the end of the day, you have to take care of yourself. So knowing the resources in your own school, such as who's in the counseling department, who's your mentor, get a mentor in your school, ask questions, and don't put it all on yourself. You're not an island. There are 100 other teachers going through the same thing. So maintain confidentiality, obviously, be professional, but reach out. You are not alone, and that will really help you create some boundaries as well.
Does that answer your question, Amy? Great. Thank you, Alex. So
yeah, sorry, that's a really tricky one. I'm sorry, Amy, if I can't really give you specifics. That's really difficult, and that'll come down to practice and time in a classroom where you observe what people do and what you feel is appropriate.
No, it was nice to even hear that, just to know that there isn't like a definitive list of rules to follow, that, you know, it is something you're going to have to gauge, and just to even go into that knowing that you have to be aware of that is honestly in and of itself very appreciative. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So next we will hear from Rachel. Rachel, please share your question.
So I think the thing that I was wondering was if you could give us some insight into what the Bachelors of Education is like, and whether the practicum, like whether you felt it really prepared you when you entered into the classroom.
That is such a great question, and the answer is no. Sorry, Rachel. UBC is great. I'm sure SFU does a very similar job from the stories I've heard and from my colleagues. The thing is, though, it is theoretical. A lot of what they're teaching you comes from a book, and you can ask your questions and you can have conversations about ethical dilemmas, but people are going to answer it differently, because teaching is really personal in a lot of ways in terms of what you need to do to be respected, based on your teaching style. You know, if you are somebody who's a little bit quieter, you're going to use different strategies than somebody who's more exuberant. So there's so many differences and so many unique and minute points to teaching. So no school can teach you all of that stuff, but UBC does a good job of answering questions in terms of theory. What do you do in something like this? What does a lesson plan properly look like? How do you unit plan? How do you create that scope and sequence I was talking about with those 5 theme units? UBC will teach you all of that, and that is essential. Assessment, they will teach you assessment. How do you grade students? And you will still have a billion questions, because that never ends. But they do a good job of preparing you to stand on your first day and say, I've got this. I know enough to be here. I deserve to be here. And then it's just experience and practice and making mistakes sometimes. In terms of the practicum, it is the most important part, in my opinion, because it gives you that practical side. It gets you away from the textbook, away from the theory, and it gets you some experience in terms of what does it look like. So, you know, it's all great to say ethical dilemma, student wants to hug me. Is that appropriate? Answer is no, it's not. Then you get into the classroom and you have a student crying. Well, you're a person too. So yeah, the practicum is really important. It's put your energy there. The courses are all pass and fail as well. So it's not like doing an undergraduate degree where you're, you know, dedicating hours of time to learn something and perfect it. You are learning theory. It is pass or fail. It's, do you have an understanding of this thing? Can you show me you do? Yeah, sure. Great. Now take that and go and try and be the best teacher you can. So the practicum matters most. And by the way, if you're wondering about that whole situation, do you hug that student? I would. Keep the door open, have other people around. Don't be silly about things, but you're people too, and human interaction is really important. Who knows how that'll change post-COVID, but treat them as human beings.
That's great.
Thank
That's a
you.
great answer.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alex, for that. That's good. So next we'll hear from Raisa. Raisa, what is your question?
Hi, so thank you so much for sharing your story. And thank you, Kat and Gerard, for hosting this. I absolutely loved everything that you had to say. I have 2 questions. The first one is one that I really like asking guest speakers. What advice would you give your younger self? And my second question is just, how has your transition been since quarantine happened? So.
Yeah. First of all, I love your name, Raisa. That is so beautiful.
Thank you.
I hope I said it right. It's beautiful.
Yep, Raisa, thanks.
My advice to my younger self is the same as I shared earlier. It's just get involved. It's meet people. You are far more likely to get a job, for instance, if people know who you are. So volunteering in a school, what I did is I volunteered in 3 schools I was interested in during my undergraduate degree. Then I went to UBC BEd and I kept in touch and I just let them know, hey, I'm still around. I really enjoyed my time in your school. I'd love to come back sometime. If you get a chance during that year at UBC or SFU, do it. Go back into those schools. And if you don't, keep those connections alive. It is so much easier to reach out to a VP you've worked with and say, hi, do you remember me? I'd really like to come back. It also, it's so much more personal than just sending an inquiry email. And the other part of that is you don't know the right environment for you as a teacher unless you've tried a few. So you will hear practicum horror stories. Of course you will. You will hear teaching horror stories. The best way to mitigate that is be a professional. If you're in a school that doesn't jive with who you are, because it's impossible for all schools to jive with you. So if they have different philosophies, give their philosophy a try. If it doesn't work, great, you know that for sure. Volunteer in different schools so that you get an idea of what the different culture of education looks like. Smaller schools, larger schools, public schools, private schools. Figure out what you like. It may actually surprise you. So that would be my biggest advice, and kind of a little bit of a pat on my own shoulder to myself because I did that. And then the other part of that is quarantine. Admittedly, I've been very, very blessed. I teach grade 12. I don't need to teach grade 12s how to operate online. I don't need to teach them how to do a Zoom call or to send a professional email, because that's what I've taught them all year at this point. And they're, applying to universities and already thinking about who they want to be. So I've had less struggle than other people would have. I also only teach one course, which is called One Prep. So I teach 150 students in different blocks, but I only teach one course. So I've only had to plan one course, which is basically my ideal. It's really wonderful. You will meet teachers who teach 5 or 6 different courses, and some of them love it, but for quarantine, this has really kicked them, because planning for 5 or 6 different courses, taking the plans you've already done and then adapting them for online is really difficult. So a huge lesson has been just go with what you need to teach them. What do they need to know per the curriculum, and what do you need to share with them per humanity? Because honestly, you can't do it all. So that's the biggest thing about quarantine.
Great answer. That's awesome. So we have another question from John. John, go ahead.
Like, how often does the curriculum change?
The basics of the curriculum remain. They don't really change too much, but we did just go through a pretty big overhaul in the last 2 years, and we're still really incorporating that. So the curriculum changed officially, formally, about a year ago. It's been a slow start. Some schools started it 4 years ago, 3 years ago to try and get it into place, but officially it started a year ago. So you're not going to, my opinion is, you won't see major changes in the next little bit. They try and keep curriculum very, very solid, because if every grade is getting something different, they're not learning anything at all. So you're not going to go through tons, but if you do spend a lifetime as a teacher, you'll probably see 3 to 5 reincarnations of it. And there will always be little things changing, because that's the culture of our time. We have to adapt and change, but major changes in curriculum don't happen very often. Okay.
Great answer. Does anyone have any last questions? Oh, yes, go ahead, Angela.
I'm trying to figure out how to word this properly. My brain apparently is just not wanting to function today. But I know you had mentioned earlier about how upon, like, on top of just teaching your English classes, you're also helping out with the debate club and the photography club. And I was just wondering, because I know you said like you were passionate about those things, like taking those clubs yourself when you were a student. So I'm just wondering, did you yourself kind of mention to the school, like, hey, you know, I'm really interested in this and I can help with this? Or was it more the school just kind of coming up to you and be like, yeah, so we kind of need another person on staff to help with this? And yeah.
Angela, it is such a good question. You articulated it really well.
Okay, good.
In my interview, I told them what my interests were.
Okay.
I didn't say I only want to do this thing, but I tried to make sure they knew, you know, I have some experience with Photoshop and Adobe, and so things like yearbook club would be a really nice fit. And I was part of debate and swimming. Those would be really cool fits as well. So you try and show them that you're open to it, but you also, it's easier to assert yourself at the beginning rather than them coming to you and you feeling like you have no choice.
Yeah.
If you hate tennis and they need a tennis coach, please don't say yes. It will hurt you in the long run. So if you see a gap that needs filling, fill it right away. Or if you are talking to students and you see a need for a club, champion that. Be their mentor for that. Start that club yourself, because it is so much easier being part of a club you care about than just having to check a box. As an aside to that, if you guys are wondering, are being part of extracurricular is mandatory? In the CISFA Catholic school system, yes, you do have to be part of an extracurricular. In the public system, no, you do not. It's encouraged, but it's not regulated. So if you do end up in the CISFA Catholic system, know what you like, see what the school has, meet up with the people in charge, because you can also co-coach or, you know, co-lead a club. It doesn't just have to be one person, and you don't want to end up somewhere you hate. So great question, Angela. Honestly, just be honest about what you like. And if somebody said, this kind of goes back to that burnout question, if somebody says we need someone to do this, just because you're the newbie rookie, don't say yes. That will burn you out. Don't be afraid to say no. I'm sorry, I'm not interested in that. That doesn't fit. Or if you're uncomfortable saying no, suggest something else. But don't say yes to everything. That is a fallacy of teaching. That is a fallacy of being a professional. You don't have to say yes to everything. You just have to say yes to the right things.
All right, thank you so much. Oh my goodness, that was so helpful.
Good.
That's fantastic life advice for, you know, kind of any sort of job interview that you go into. You know, speak what you know, talk about what you like, talk about your interests, and like Alex said, you know, talk about what you would be willing to potentially do, but also don't say no or don't say yes to something that you are not comfortable with. So I'll just ask again, does anyone have any final questions? Jarwin, go ahead.
I get Alex. So you mentioned, so you do teach in the CISFA system. So I'm just wondering, like, coming out of the UBC BEd, I've heard from some teachers that there's an interview process, and like getting into CISFA, like what does that look like? What do they ask you to prepare, or how can we prepare ourselves for that application or interview with like the Catholic school system?
Great question. So yes, to teach in a Catholic school, you have to have CISFA's approval, for lack of a better term. You will have to interview with CISFA. So that's at John Paul II in Vancouver. You'll go there, you'll set up an interview, you'll go there and you'll interview with someone. Probably Lisha. She's been doing it for a while now. And they'll ask you a bunch of standard questions in terms of why teaching, what's your philosophy of education, which UBC will help you prepare. Why Catholic versus secular? They will ask you that. Things like, what kind of teacher do you want to be? What's important to you? Do you understand your role as a Catholic educator? Things like those are the questions they'll ask you. So it's not difficult. The things you have to prepare, not difficult, but it's extensive. And there's a list on CISFA's website. So if you go to the CISFA website, there is an actual list. I believe it's called an application list. So you'll just have to, I really don't like their website, pardon me, but you will just have to search around on there to find it. And there is a checklist, and they will let you know exactly what they need, such as a certain amount of reference letters, a pastoral reference. They will need your records from the B.Ed program. They will ask you to write a philosophy of Catholic education, things like that. So it's not difficult. They should be things that you kind of collect along the way, but just keep that in mind. So you'll do that, you'll apply, then CISPA will say, yes, you're approved. I don't think you're crazy. You would be a good Catholic educator. And then from there, I believe this has just changed, but I think they're going to now put you into basically an online portfolio part that CISPA creates, and Catholic schools have access to them. And so if they have a role that needs filling, they'll take a look at this registry and they may contact you. The Catholic system is different than the public system in this regard. If you want to become a public school teacher, there are other steps you have to follow, and UBC-SFU will be very good at providing those steps for you, so don't worry. But there's other things that you have to do for them. You apply through the union, through each school district. For Catholic school, you apply through CISPA, and then you yourself can go to schools and say, I want to work here. I want to apply to this school. Public system, you can't do that. You apply to the district, and then they decide if they need some role filled in a school. You can't go to the school in the public system and say, I want to work here. They don't care. Catholic system, you can go, for instance, to Notre Dame and say, this is where I want to work. I'd like to volunteer here. I'd like to get to know people. I'd like to apply. And that's great, as long as you have CISPA's approval that yes, you can become a Catholic educator, then you can go directly to the schools. So it's actually such a better system, in my opinion, because it's more personal and you can actually choose where you want to work, and go to that school and say, this is what I want. Okay, so take a look at the CISPA site for the checklist. I would recommend setting up a meeting or being in email communication with them probably the October, November of your B.Ed year. Start contacting them. Probably book an interview with them in February or March of your B.Ed year. And then you can start applying to schools in March or April. April is when most schools are looking for September roles, September jobs. Does that make sense? Anyone else have questions about that? Because that's the practical stuff nobody ever tells you.
I figured.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I didn't know that that's how it worked. That I thought that it was the same, but that's really interesting to know.
Yeah, very, very different.
So much. I told you you're wise. All right, we'll hear from Rachel.
So when you're applying for Catholic schools, or even when you're in the B.Ed, is there an option of being able to do your practicum at a Catholic school so you can already have those connections so that it's then easier when you go through CISPA?
Awesome question. Yes and no. Yes and no. So the gentleman in charge of it at UBC, I believe he still is, his name is Jimmy. You'll meet him. He will come to one of your first big group meetings when you first get into the program. He will tell you he's in charge of setting up practicum placements, and he will ask at some point for you to fill out a form where you can set requests for districts, for location. For instance, if you live in West Point Grey by UBC, they don't really want to send you out to Langley. They will if they can't fill that practicum slot and they need to. So you could end up there, but they don't want to do that. They try and give you your first pick. So you can kind of let them know what interests you. Tell them that your experience is from Catholic school. Tell them you're interested in being placed in a Catholic school. There are only about two or three secondary Catholic schools that do practicum placements. And there's only a few elementary schools that do practicum placements. I hope this changes. I hope there's more. But It's not the standard way of going through things. So if you do want to end up in a Catholic school, tell them that. One major thing is there can't be a conflict of interest. So if you volunteered at Notre Dame, they will not send you to Notre Dame for your practicum. So if you've already volunteered at all Catholic schools in the Lower Mainland, that's a no. That's not going to work. But generally speaking, you get a little bit of say. And if you don't get your first choice, you're still teaching students. It's a different environment. It's a different feeling, but it's only 3 months. And you are still learning the same skills you would in a Catholic school. It will make you a better teacher regardless. I was very fortunate. I was placed at St. Thomas Aquinas in North Van. Bus ride nearly killed me for 3 months, but it was a great school to be in, and then to teach in the Catholic system. So if it's possible, they will try and work with you for that. If it's not possible, they did try.
Great.
Thank you.
Well said. Awesome. So before I ask if we have any further questions, I just want to take a quick group photo of everyone since this is the new norm. So everyone smile as big as you can. Sam, if you're still there, please smile. 1, 2, 3. Beautiful. Okay, thank you. So, oh yeah, bye Emma. Thank you for joining. So I'll just ask one last time. Does anyone have any questions for Alex or myself or Gerard during this time?
Thank you for hosting this.
Of course, I'm happy to. Thank you, Gerard. I love doing these things, so I find it very fun, and I'm happy to help you guys in any way that I can. So I'm sure that you think that this has been very informative. I have taken so many notes. Good. So thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you, Kat and Gerard, for having me. This was great. And if anyone, such amazing questions, if anyone has further questions, I'm happy to share my email with Kat and she can circulate it.
Sure.
Please just feel free to reach out. Honestly, having somebody already, getting back to my whole point about being connected, get involved. I'm a connection now, so feel free to contact me. Okay, guys?
I love it. Great. Well, thank you so much, Alex. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. It's wonderful to spend our Thursday night together. I know that I'm missing the social interaction around being at Corpus, so I really do appreciate it. And I will just pass things over to Gerard for closing remarks.